What do you want to tell us?
Well, ambitious, that's one word for it. I thought when I heard that 2 billion trees been planted, I thought, billion? So I went to the Woodland Trust website about advice on planting your own, private forest, which some people do.
Yes.
So if you have a small species of tree, like a birch, so this absolute minimum, 500 birch per acre,
Right.
that gives you 4 million acres. Then you divide that by 640 to get square miles.
Right.
That's 6,250 square miles.
Blimey.
Then according to the Woodland Trust, you have to add 20%. Sorry about all these formulas, but this is exactly what they say, and I know what they're talking about. Service roads and such like, you add 20%. The grand total minimum, depending on the species of tree, is 7,500 square miles. To put that into perspective, Mike, that's 25 times the area of Greater London.
25 times?
The area of Greater London.
Blimey. That is big, isn't it? That's sort of half the country, isn't it?
Well, it's going to be interesting. And I heard you say earlier that someone's worked out 11,000 trees per hour for the next 20 years. Oh, all the parties just throw these fancy figures around, 1 billion here. It's no longer millions, it's all billions, which is 1,000 million, Mike. We forget it's 1,000 million. And,
it's an awful lot. So how many square miles are we talking about altogether?
Including service roads, a minimum of 7,500 square miles.
OK, because I'm looking at Wales as I'm thinking, it's nice to put things into a size. Wales is 8,000 square miles. So you're basically talking...
Is it really?
Yeah. So you're basically talking about covering Wales...
considerable coverage going on.
In trees.
I thought Wales was bigger. Well, anyway, I've just learnt something. 2 things today.
There you go. Excellent stuff, Philip. Thank you very much indeed. I mean, it is remarkable, isn't it? I mean, you could call this it's already been called the comedy election, the kind of have I got news for you election. The numbers involved, Rakib, in what's being shouted out. I mean, we've got the Office for the Institute for Fiscal Studies this morning saying basically that neither the Tories nor Labour have actually got a credible financial plan to do anything. And they just seem to... I mean, only Labour would announce this, right? They're saying they're going to invest 1.2 billion to restore natural habitats such as woodland, grassland, meadows, peat bogs and salt marshes in England, with an extra annual 75 million funding boost. They want to bring back otters. They want to bring... why would you say 2 billion trees?
I would just expect our major political parties to take the general election a bit more seriously, to be honest. To actually, when you're coming up and calculating to these figures, do it in a measured, proper, methodologically sound way.
Well,
it doesn't seem like that's the case.
And this is a programme that's going to go until 2040, right? Which means that if they did win in this particular election, they'd have to remain in power for 20 years to continue to build all of this stuff and all the houses that they're supposed to be building. I think they're supposed to build something like 300 houses a day in order to make up the numbers that they say they want to make. And we've had people from the property business saying to us, well, actually, there's not enough bricks in the country.
It's just not feasible.
You can't build houses that quickly. And so it's no wonder, really, that people are looking at these manifestos and going, what are you talking about?
I think that when political parties are making these sort of pledges or thinking of making these sort of pledges, they should communicate more and work with key industries.
Yeah.
When it comes to designing and developing these policies, it just seems like that's not really the case.
Well, I asked Barry Gardner earlier, I said, well, where are you going to make these 10 extra national parks? Have you got a plan as to where they would actually be? And he clearly doesn't have one. He said, well, obviously that would be for the future, for us to consider where we would plant a new national park. But you can't just suddenly go, I'll tell you what, let's put a national park over there. Never mind those houses, never mind a car park, never mind that road. We'll just make it into a national park.
There's no point being ambitious in terms of policy if you're weak on the detail and if they're not been well thought out.
No, exactly right. What do you think is going to happen over the next 2 weeks? Because as the polling comes closer and closer to the election day itself, this one is being said to be mirroring one that was done before the last election, which did show that there would be a hung parliament effectively. So it's looking like it might be quite accurate. If the Labour Party was to lose by that number and to give the Tories a majority of 68 seats, that'd be devastating for them, wouldn't it?
It'd be an it would be an absolutely horrific electoral result for the Labour Party. As we discussed earlier, some of the constituencies in play, it is classic traditional Labour territory.
Yeah.
We're looking at seats such as Ashfield, for example, in the provincial Midlands in Nottinghamshire. In the 1997 general election, they voted 65.1% Labour.
For Tony Blair.
Yeah, now this is a seat, a very pro-Brexit seat, which now looks like it's going to be
Does this tell you then
going to the Conservatives.
Does this then tell you that the centre ground is still where you win elections? That, you know, there's no point in having a very left-wing or a very right-wing party because people just don't want it?
I think I mean, if you want to talk about if there's a new sweet spot in British political society, I've always made this point that the Conservatives' route to a healthy parliamentary majority this time around, if they articulate this uplifting, patriotic, red Tory vision, so, you know, tough on crime, for example, introducing a regimented, points-based immigration system, robust British defence policy, but also having a more compassionate, caring approach towards public services, making sure that they're well funded, also looking at things such as social care, also understanding the economic anxieties which do exist in working class Brexit territory, so traditional, you know, Labour heartlands, in former steel and coal mining communities. Talk about ambitious infrastructure projects.
Not too ambitious, obviously.
Not too ambitious to the extent that the figures don't add up.
Right.
But understand that there's some left behind areas in this country. They've been politically abandoned for some time. If they manage to successfully articulate that red Tory vision, then they are on course for that sort of parliamentary majority, and Labour are bang in trouble.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things as well from this poll is that they're not predicting any seats for the Brexit Party. I think you and I have spoken about this before, where I'd said, you know, I think they'll be doing very well to get 4 or 5. Now it looks as though since Nigel Farage has withdrawn an awful lot of the candidates, they may not get any at all. What do you think that's all about?
I think that when you look at the Brexit Party, I think one of the big objectives for the Conservative Party coming into this general election was really driving down the Brexit Party vote, and it looks like at the moment that they're quite successful on that front. I think that, you know, first you announce that you're going to have all these parliamentary, you know, candidates across the country, and then you step them down in, you know, in the Tory-held seats, but you keep them in the Labour-held seats. To be honest, the way they've approached the general election, as we discussed before, has been quite amateurish. Yes. And perhaps people have caught on to that. And they've also...
I think they've upset a lot of their own supporters, because a lot of their own supporters were really hoping that this might be the beginning of a different
Mike, some of their candidates
politics.
started financially investing in their campaigns before they were told to step down. So it's not ideal.
No,
it's not ideal at all.
No, but also people, I think, really did believe, rightly or wrongly, that the Brexit Party might offer a difference of a two-party to the two-party system. They might actually somehow hold the balance of power in some way,
they produced a document, something along the lines of contract with the people. It was a very small document. It wasn't very long. I think in terms of policy substance, it probably wasn't quite.
It wasn't a great deal to it. No,
there wasn't a great deal to it.
So,
yeah,
I mean, are they finished now as well, then, do you think, after this election, if they don't get any seats?
Well, if the Conservative Party win a healthy parliamentary majority that Boris can really work with in terms of delivering Brexit, then you have to ask, what is the purpose now of the Brexit Party, especially if they don't win any seats?
If Brexit then happens, they don't have any European MEPs either. There's not a lot of point to them, is there?
Well, they did very well in the European Parliament elections.
They
did. That was a single issue election on a low turnout, which is Nigel Farage's bread and butter.
And it's also proportional representation. So they get their share freely, which they maybe don't get in this particular election.
Mike, if you compare a European Parliament election to a general election is a totally different ballgame, and I think the Brexit Party found that out.
Well, I was just to go over a couple of points that you'd raised during your talk with Mr. Francois, and then previously with your previous guest. It was about that people, I think, are just sick of the entire political system in this country, and that they're sick of MPs, they're sick of politicians. And you mentioned, you know, about the Brexit Party being slightly amateurish in the way they were going about things, but that's the point. It's because they're not politicians. A lot of the candidates are just people from other walks of life that have decided to get involved, and in contrast to that, you mentioned about the manifestos being uncosted, being, you know, about planting trees, and that nobody has an idea how they've just picked figures out of the air.
Yeah,
and that's because they themselves have no clue what they're putting in their manifestos. I mean, for example, the last Conservative manifesto was written by two people, both of whom had no contact with the real world. And the Labour manifesto is the same. You know, it's written by two workers for the party who've always worked for the party.
Yeah, and I suspect they've probably done some kind of focus group activity where they've asked people what's important to them, and then they go, oh look, a lot of people think this is important, let's do that.
Yeah, but sadly, Mr. Francois there, he highlighted exactly the problem. He mentioned the fact that he'd been up in the northeast of England campaigning on behalf of his researcher.
Yeah.
So he goes from university, researcher, MP, writing a manifesto, and he never has any contact with business, with working in the public sector, and that's what people are sick of. MPs and politicians who live in a complete bubble and have don't really have any idea of what life in the country is like.
I mean, it's the age of the sort of professional politician, isn't it? That's what you're saying, because there was a time when people went into politics after having done something else.
Exactly, and now you get so many young people that you want everyone to be 70 and 60 or whatever, but you want people to have actually lived, and worked in business, worked in the health service, worked in a factory, and know what they're talking about when it's, well, I don't know how many bricks it takes to build a house.
Right.
So, all right, let's build 1 million houses. You know, it's just, and then that's why people get disillusioned, because they write the manifestos, and they can't keep to their promises.
Well, of course they can't. I mean, imagine trying to plant enough trees to cover Wales. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
That's a bit. It sounds good. And the thing is, they think we're stupid.
Yeah.
And that's the insulting thing, and that's why people are really, really hacked off with politicians, that they're the liars and they're the incompetents, but they think we're the stupid ones.
Well, I know. That's the point. And in fact, Boris Johnson's been criticised quite heavily this morning because he has yet still to agree to a time when he's going to go into Andrew Neil's studio and be interviewed by Andrew Neil in the same way that Nicola Sturgeon was, in the same way that Jeremy Corbyn was, and in the same way that Joe Swinson is going to be as well. Greg, thanks for your call. Let's talk to Simon, who's in Orpington. Hi, Simon.
Hi, good morning, Mike.
Morning.
Just my 2 pennies worth on this poll that came out yesterday. Reassuring to see it, but I was reminded this morning about your call with Katy Perry a few days back, where she's saying, actually, if you're in the lead, you don't necessarily want this poll coming out because it does lead to complacency.
Yes.
And also, I think as well, that's something to really rally the Labour activists around and to get out there. I think there is a big danger of complacency in this vote. A lot of us thinking, well, I kind of want to go this way or the other, but what's really the point if this is going to be the outcome anyway?
Yeah. I mean, I think people are generally speaking quite savvy about what their sort of situation is vis-a-vis, if it's a very strong Tory seat, they might not go out and vote because they might not feel they need to. And if it is a very strong Tory seat or a very strong Labour seat, chances are it will stay that way. But the trouble is, you never really know in an election like this.
I guess you don't know, no. And I think that's why, let's say Boris does come home with a stonking majority on the 13th. I'd be relieved, but I won't necessarily be celebrating because I feel that we're still going to have the two-party system where a lot of people do feel that, their vote does get wasted. And then my question would be, well, who is actually going to keep the Conservative Party conservative? Because it's been for the last, maybe 5-6 more years, it's been Farage and UKIP. If you take this Australian-style immigration policy, that's a UKIP policy.
Yeah.
Now, if Boris is promising it now to get the Brexit Party vote, let's say the Brexit Party is taken out, which I think it will be on the 13th, who's actually going to hold him to that? So that I guess that is my concern. And the other sort of final point I make as well, I feel as well with Labour, I feel like they've gone to the break-in emergency glass way too early, and it shows their desperation.
Well, I think that business yesterday, it seemed to me, I don't know if you felt the same way, that you're exactly right, that this was the kind of the trump card, if you'll pardon the expression, that they suddenly pulled out of the pack and went, right, have a go at this then, because then at least you'll stop talking about all the anti-Semitism in the Andrew Neil interview.
Definitely. And do you know what, Mike? Corbyn's on stage waving a piece of paper saying, look what I found. And it says on it 2017 to 2018. Yeah. Shows how pathetic it is. I really think on this one, I think it's actually a disgraceful strategy from Labour that they're saying to people who, some people on low incomes, they're relying on their drugs week by week and their weekly appointments with their doctors. and they're putting the fear of God into them, saying, this may be taken away from you.
Yeah.
I think it's a completely wrong strategy. As I say, people should stop getting so triggered by the big red bus and actually be outraged at this. I hope in many years to come, Labour will hold their head in shame over this strategy.
Well, let's see how it works out for them, because it doesn't even play a part in this particular poll, which is in the paper today, because it will probably play a part in the polls at the weekend, and we'll see whether or not the interview that Jeremy Corbyn gave to Andrew Neil, and as I say, Boris Johnson is yet to do that one, and he's being accused of running scared because he may not do it. He may choose not to sit in with Andrew Neil, which would, I think, be a mistake on his part.
It really worries me now. I'm looking at Jeremy Corbyn, what he's saying, and it worries me that he just doesn't think things through, or his advisors. Now, he wants to double the amount of parks. He wants to plant 5 million trees or whatever, and he wants to plant
2 billion trees.
2 billion trees.
Yeah.
He wants to build about 1 million houses. And I've looked at a map of Great Britain, and I'm thinking the only way he's going to achieve this is when he builds a house, he's going to have a big oak tree going up through the living room because there's not enough space.
No, there isn't. Well, I mean, we've literally worked out that he's going to have to cover the area roughly of Wales with trees in the next sort of 21 years.
Yeah. And so where's all these houses and parks going to go? You know, it just amazes me. I really don't think they think it through.
No, I don't think they do either. Also, why is it now that we seem to be living in this time when whenever any politician mentions anything, they just kind of come up with some ludicrously large number?
Well, but I really think, because the Green Party will come out and say, we're going to plant 5 billion trees, 10 billion trees. And then it's almost like a round of poker. It's like a poker table. They try and up the ante on each other.
Yeah, exactly.
I really think, Mike, they really think that we are stupid and we don't shake our heads and think, please don't take us for fools. You know?
Quite. I mean, because presumably, judging from what you're telling me, Richard, you're not really buying any of this stuff.
Oh, well, no, because, you know...
Same as the Tories are. I mean, they're calling for, 50,000 nurses are going to come into the NHS, and then they suddenly go, well, actually, 19,000 of them are already there. And you go, well, that's not another 50,000 then, is it?
No, it's absolutely ridiculous. And I just sit here and I just, I'm praying. I'm taking some, I don't know, well, I can't take Mogadon because I'm a driver, but, I just want to wake up on Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
And, I don't know.
Yeah, but of course, then the problem is we'll be going back to talking about Brexit 24/7.
Yeah.
Until that happens.
Exactly, mate. It's absolutely terrible. Anyway, Mike, I'm way behind now, waiting for you, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
No, absolutely great to talk to you, Richard. Thank you very much indeed. John's absolutely right. They don't think anything through, do they? Let's talk to John, who's in Spain. Hello, John.
Oh, hi.
How are you doing?
Good afternoon to you.
Yes, and
Not bad. I just
to
had
you.
my third pint at £1.25 a pint.
Very nice.
It's
Very
in the
nice.
sun of 75 degrees. But I just wanted to have
You just want to make us feel even worse than we already do, John, don't you?
3 beautiful Finnish girls there too.
Steady.
Anyway, just a quick point as regarding the Corbyn thing about the United States and the farmer side. What he neglected to mention is that basically in the United States, which I've worked with all my life, they have quite a long patent thing, which is not common elsewhere. So, and one thing they never ever take into consideration is probably one of the only few things that the Democrats and Trump has in common. He hates the big farmers. They're ripping the American people off,
right?
And he doesn't want to put prices on us. He wants to bring the farmers into line, where the US people aren't paying the same price. They're paying much, much higher prices,
right,
because of the patent thing than they are in the rest of the world. There may have to be a little bit of a change, but that is one thing that the Democrats and Trump, he absolutely hates big pharma, and they don't take that into consideration.
No, they don't. I mean, the other thing they don't take into consideration is the fact that, it's not the US government that does the deal, that sells the drugs to the NHS. It's nothing to do with the two countries' governments as such. It's the NHS buying from pharmaceutical companies in America. Yeah. It's that simple. I mean, Donald Trump is not going to stick his nose into the middle of that, and he's got absolutely no interest, as he said many times, in having, the NHS for sale to American companies.
Yeah, I mean, the US has the same problem with Canada and the rest of the world. The drugs are cheaper. It's because of the generic side, and the patents last much longer in the US. And he's probably going to have to change that to get anything moving in that respect. But the impeachment has dried up everything anyway.
Yes.
So there's been nothing forward in that. in the last 6 months. But
I mean, I know a fair amount about the American medical system because, one, I lived there for 10 years, and two, my sister and my mother still live there, and one of my sons lives there. And basically, I mean, this kind of scaremongering about, you're not going to, nobody wants to be charged £25,000 for having a baby. Well, you're not charged £25,000 for having a baby. People have health insurance, and it works in a slightly different way. There's also always a generic version of any drug that you can get, which is substantially cheaper than the branded one.
That's right. I mean, that's what has to happen, and that is the problem for the United States, that the patents last not that much longer.
Yeah.
But can I just make one point about the environment that never comes up?
Yeah.
I've been around a long time, and we've had the last 40 years. We've had the tipping points. The scientists, they say follow the science. The science hasn't got it right in 40 years. They may have it right this time, I don't know. But what they're predicting now is the same thing they predicted in the United Nations speech of June 1989.
Exactly.
That's not the problem. They don't come up with the main problem. The major problem is, which nobody wants to address, is the fact that the population explosion, they'll want the same things we have. So you're going to have to try and stop the population explosion, and worse still, you're going to have to deny the emerging nations the opportunity of living like we do in the West.
Yeah.
And that's impossible.
Well, exactly. And I've got
I've
got no interest in going back to the Stone Age, thanks very much indeed. It took us quite a long time to get here into a civilised state, and I'd rather stay in a civilised state. Thank you very much indeed.